Greetings, this is Eugene the Philosopher, the greatest living philosopher after the unfortunate passing of Quentin Robert D. Nameland, who has been the greatest living philosopher before me. In this video, I wish to talk about something, let's say, which I've noticed way too many times, especially among alternative scientists. And this is sort of a prominent pattern, way of thinking, you might say, or mode of operation of the mind, etc., etc. And it's particularly strong among among alternative scientists. So I'll give you just a couple of random examples that I just completely made up to illustrate what I'm talking about. So for example, somebody might tell you that, oh, everything is vibration. This is a statement that I'm going to be talking about, or rather a type of statement, right? Another example might be that somebody might tell you that the world is a tetrahedron or something like that. Or somebody might tell you that the number phi, the golden ratio, describes everything. Or the number pi, or the Euler's number E, or any combination of those, or somebody might tell you, oh, everything is electric. Or something to that effect. So, all these types of kind of overly generalized descriptions of the world, that's what I'm going to be discussing here. And I believe that this is a very one-dimensional, extremely simplified vision of the world in the first place. And I wish to note here, though, that there are people who partake in the same activities, let's say, but on a higher level, you might claim. And in particular, what I'm talking about is, for example, string theory, which also sort of describes everything. Or you might think about this, I just saw it in my newsfeed yesterday, this Eric Weinstein's, some sort of geometric picture of the world or whatever, like a theory of everything. So there are certainly theoretical physicists and mathematicians who partake in this same, well, I would place them in the same bin as all those people above, or fictional people, or not so much, that make statements like the world is a tetrahedron or whatever. So yeah, so in theoretical physicists and mathematicians, there is certainly a professional deformation, but also, that sort of induces them to overutilize mathematics, let's say, and plus the same urge for simplicity that we can observe in those other alternative scientists who claim that the world is a tetrahedron or whatever crap like that. Okay, so firstly, I should note that I have the same problems with all those kinds of statements as with theory of everything. See my video Explanation of an Explanation, where I've described it in more detail. In particular, what I'm talking about is that they are impractical and have no implications whatsoever. So, and really, like if you look at it from a distance, let's say, you'll easily notice that the point in all those statements really is only to induce awe and feeling of quasi-religious relief or something like that, to receive some consolation or amazement or blah, 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 things like that. And unsurprisingly, I should say, there is almost always, when people talk about things like that, in their statements, there's almost always some sort of connection to something mystical or esoteric or something, in a bad sense of the word, by the way. All right, so let us analyze briefly what could be the sources of these sentiments that can be exemplified by statements I made above. So I believe that the primary source is some sort of remnant religiousness, or religiosity, I don't know. We need some sink, roughly speaking, for channeling our religious feelings, right? More or less every one of us needs that. Because since religion is not fashionable anymore, by the way, I remember hearing somewhere, maybe it was on Joe Rogan podcast or somewhere else, that somebody said, and it kind of stuck with me, that religion is not fashionable right now. I'm not directly quoting, I'm paraphrasing. So people, instead of saying they're religious today, it's more fashionable to say, oh, I'm spiritual, you know, but really it means religious. It's just that maybe some nonconformist type of religious, you know, some hippie, new age kind of crap, etc. So, since religion is not fashionable, today people try to dress really religious ideas into scientific clothes. So, for example, and again, in like mainstream science, we have a lot of examples of that, like Big Bang cosmology, for example. It was again a religious idea dressed in a scientific clothes, or in a like a para-scientific world, we have also examples of that, like with quantum mysticism, for example. I mean, people like Deepak Chopra and others who indulge in this area of, I don't even know how to call it, research. Let's give them some benefit of the doubt. Okay, so yeah, so and there's also this sentiment that I've described in one of my previous videos. Unfortunately, I cannot remember which one. Quite a recent one, by the way, where it said, maybe that was Obsession with Origins, but probably not, probably more recent one. But anyway, so there is this religious idea that from order comes chaos. Oh, it was about the world as a simulation, I think. So from order comes chaos, from order comes justice. Sorry, that was a flashback. So from order comes chaos is a religious idea. So Logos, the God, etc., created the world, and the world is chaotic. So order created chaos. It's a religious idea, whereas I personally prefer the other way around. Chaos creates order. That's more of a mindset of an artist. Like as an artist, you understand that you're a terrible wreck and like a garbage dump, essentially. But from this garbage, you manufacture something spectacular and orderly. This is art, essentially. A piece of art. So that's a mindset of an artist. From chaos comes order, right? Things organize, etc. All right. So this idea is really old. It comes from religion, and there's also a lot of let's say offshoots of this idea. I mean, from order comes chaos in philosophy, like. People say, oh, there's this world of ideas of Plato, for example, but when it projects into reality, it creates these more dirty and rough things from which you have to deduce logically or philosophically the ideas that stand behind them in this perfect world of ideas, right? The world of order, the world of ideas, and the world of chaos, our world, where ideas only exist as something hidden almost, right? And the same is like this German idealist philosophy, Kant, etc., who said that there are Ding an sich, which is like the thing in itself in this world of ideas, but what we observe are phenomena which are kind of dirty, and you have to work your way into the world of ideas intellectually, right, from it. But anyway, sorry, that was kind of a long digression. So it's a really old idea, and it also is characteristic of this sort of, or rather it serves as one of the sources of this worldview that I've described above. I mean, of the people who claim that the world is a tetrahedron, or everything can be described by the golden ratio, or some idiotic spiral, etc. Again, there are oftentimes it's represented as a picture, as some, again, idiotic spiral or a fractal set or whatever, and people claim, behold, this is the truth of the world, this is what the world is, etc., and some idiotic crap like that. So again, this worldview is fundamentally not scientific, because, and again, one of the most prominent characteristics of science is analysis. It's not only the method of science, but it's also like almost an conditio sine qua non, again, the condition without which science is impossible. It's like its inherent trait, you might say, analysis again. And what is analysis? It's like separating the phenomenon into different parts, or rather like trying to isolate the phenomenon in the first place. So we separate it into parts and see which parts are important and which parts are not important. So in this way, we can derive some sort of causality, because we say, well, okay, because, well, roughly speaking, any phenomenon has infinitely many characteristics, right? So we need to analyze it in order to determine which characteristics are important, in order to determine the physical laws or whatever, like causality behind the phenomenon. So analysis helps us to do that. So analysis is fundamentally a division of a thing into parts and throwing away unimportant parts and keeping only the important ones. Whereas this mindset that says, oh, everything is a tetrahedron or whatever, dodecahedron, it says that, no, we don't analyze, we just kind of throw it on all of the world as a blanket thing, you know. So we don't analyze stuff. We don't say that, well, you know, light is different from fire, or I don't know, whatever, or stone. Stone is not the same thing as light, right? That's analysis, that's science. Whereas these guys say that stone and light are the same thing. They are also described by this magnificent metagalactic fractal or whatever crap. Hopefully you get the idea. So it's not science, basically, that's what I'm saying. And it just kind of piles everything together into this horrible dump of an idea. All right, so that was what I've said, one of the sources, the primary one, I believe, the religiousness, right? Remnant religiousness. Like, we have our religious feelings, and right now religion is pretty much non-existent, so we need to channel them somewhere. I think I'll make a video about remnant religiousness, because it's really an important thing, and there's a lot of instances where it comes into play in our culture, but that will be a bit later, maybe in a couple of weeks. So, all right, or maybe even more. Anyway, another important set of roots or sources for this sort of worldview would be psychological. And in particular, what I'm talking about is there is a certain, let's say, tiredness of society, that like the society is kind of feels that it's kind of old. There's a lot of history behind, and people are sort of tired because of that, you know. There's no naivety is lost, you know, like this proverbial romanticism is lost, where we're sort of these late stage nihilistic kind of people, or at least it seems so. So we are tired and we are overwhelmed with the world's complexity, because again, current society is extremely complex. It's the most complex society history has ever seen, at least our known history, right? So, and we are overwhelmed by all of that, and we seek certain solace in something, and in particular, like in something simple. And it's a really well-known action in psychology. Against Sigmund Freud talked about this, that regression is really one of the fundamental coping mechanisms or defense mechanisms of a person. So let's say when you encounter something that shocks you, or like, well, damages you in some abstract sense, you tend to regress to like simpler version of yourself, right? You can almost like become a child in some sense. So again, regress, like reduce your own complexity as a person. Like, for example, if you encounter something awkward in society, so it kind of hurts you, it kind of attacks you in a certain way, you kind of regress into this childlike form, and you can laugh at it, for example, like for no reason. Like it's not funny, but you're laughing because you cannot cope with it in any other way, right? Or you can, like, let's say something terrible happened to a person, like some tragedy, or they got fired, or they got divorced or something, and they kind of lock themselves up in their room and start just, you know, just fiddling with something, and just like kind of dump themselves into this more primitive form and just do some mechanical thing. kind of, they just cannot process what's going on, so they regress into this simpler form, right? This is what I'm talking about. Or in madness, you might say, well, I'm not a psychologist, not a psychiatrist, definitely, but I think a lot of forms of madness come from something like that. Like, let's say a person encounters something, or it's not necessarily some event, but it might be just their own internal complexity became so high that they kind of just destroyed itself. The personality just destroyed itself, and it became, in order to sort of cope with that, it simplified into something like really, really primitive. So certainly I think a lot of forms of madness are about that. The person encountered something so complex and difficult that they had to regress to complete, sort of vegetable state. And again, it makes sense, like when mental institutions, when people are locked there, because, well, they just cannot deal with complex reality. So they have to deal with something very simple, like just their bed, the cafeteria there in this institution, and I don't know, maybe a couple of, how do you say it? Whatever, procedures, let's say. So it's very simplified, very ordered, and it shelters them from an external world. I'm not advocating for mental institutions, but per se, but I mean, if a person undergone transformation like that, you have to deal with that somehow, right? So, well, that's one option, I guess. All right, and it kind of makes sense. In this sense, at least. So we seek solace psychologically in some simple idea that would kind of explain everything, So we need this somebody, some big guy coming to us and like putting their head on our shoulder and saying that, everything would be all right, we can handle this. It's really simple. So it's this sentiment. We need to simplify stuff because we are so tired of complexity. We are so badly injured by it, right? That's what I'm talking about. And that's one of the branches of this psychological source of this sort of thinking. Another branch would be nonconformity and egoism even of let's say, the authors of these ideas, these alternative scientists or whatever. Because a lot of times they have this sentiment that you are all stupid, I know better, the world is simple and I'll tell you how it is, essentially, something like that. The world is a tetrahedron, let me show you my fancy pictures. So, alright, so hopefully that's more or less understandable. So we have a large segment of religious roots behind this sort of thinking, and we have a large segment of psychological roots. And probably there are more things, but I think those are the main ones. Right, so let me give you briefly again my arguments against this sort of worldview that the world is a tetrahedron, or everything is electric, or I don't know, whatever, you name it, like everything is a golden ratio produced fractal from some stupid equation, like I don't know why I remembered it, but recently somebody asked about this idiot Miles Mathis on Facebook, and I just remembered his paper where he claims that pi equals 4, and it's just, I mean, yeah, seriously, like this dude really knows things, all right, anyway. So my arguments against this sort of worldview is, firstly, it's impractical. Again, it has no implications. You cannot, like, if the world is a tetrahedron, how would you, I don't know, cook your potatoes? Like, how would it help you? Well, you see what I'm saying? Like, how does it even relate to anything at all, Again, see my video explanation where I talk about the theories of everything. They're really all of them, they're all impractical. Because again, they pile everything together, they don't distinguish stuff. And we need to distinguish stuff, well, to operate in the world, right? Right, so that's one point. It's impractical. The second point is that I have ethical problem with this stance towards the world, because you think if you are the author of this thing, that you are smarter than all of the world, literally. Like you can describe all of the world, all of the universe, I mean, not like the people's world, so to speak. All of the universe with some stupid equation or some stupid picture or some stupid statement, or idiotic geometry. And like, yeah, you can explain it with a simple thing like that. And I believe there's a lot of poorly reflected upon personal pride or hubris, you might say, or arrogance even. So yeah, ethically I'm against this sort of people, let's say. And there's an aesthetic component to my detest of these kinds of theories. And because, well, my preference, my personal preference, I'm sort of a jester myself, so my personal preference is all those trickstery kind of things, almost you might say devilish or demonic kinds of things, because, well, any jester is really a servant of a devil, you know, in some sense. Not in a literal sense. I mean, the idea of a devil is as stupid as an idea of a god. All those, you know, clever, witty things, complex and deceiving things, like all this, how would you say it, detailedness, all this elegance, no, that's not the word, sorry. Finesse, I guess, would be better. Like this subtlety, you know, in deception, like a little hook that kind of overturns the whole universe. That's the ultimate joke, so to speak, right? All those kinds of things. That's what kind of excites me more. And there's again, progressive rock band that also embraces this sort of symbolism of all those complex, deceiving things. It's King Crimson, and it's one of my most favorite bands. It's really cool. All right, anyway, so all those things for me are much more fun than all these simplifying, idiotic, moronic theories about everything, like everything is a logarithmic spiral or whatever, or Mandelbrot fractal, or etc. This is really no fun, you know. No fun, my babe, no fun, etc. That's too much Stooges on this channel, I believe, but anyway. So this one-dimensional tetrahedral or frequency-driven, vibrationally driven, or golden ratio or oriented, or electric world oriented is really toothless to me. And even worse than that, it's plain and simply boring. Thank you for watching. The eons are closing.